The sun hammered down on the Red River Valley like a blacksmith shaping hot iron. It was the year 1875, and the heat did not care for the boundaries drawn on paper maps. It rose in shimmering waves from the cracked earth of the Texas-Oklahoma border, distorting the horizon where the blue sky met the dusty brown scrub. Here, the land was a breathless thing, waiting for rain that refused to fall and for a war that refused to end. Caroline Hart, known to everyone in the territory simply as Carrie, adjusted the brim of her hat and squinted against the glare. At 22 years of age, she had learned that squinting caused wrinkles, a fact her aunt in St. Louis had written about in 3 separate letters. But out here on the edge of the Comanche territory, vanity was the first thing to die of thirst. She rode her chestnut mare, Nutmeg, with an ease that betrayed her upbringing. She was the daughter of Thomas Hart, the owner of the Hart Ranch, and she had been in the saddle before she could properly walk. Yet, as she navigated the dry creek bed that gave the nearby town its name, Carrie felt the familiar, chafing restriction of her riding habit. The heavy fabric and the corset beneath it were not designed for the brutal reality of the frontier. They were a cage. Much like the expectations placed upon her, she was expected to be the good white lady. She was expected to play the piano in the parlor, even though the piano was out of tune and the parlor was full of dust. She was expected to marry a man who could secure the ranch's future, regardless of whether he made her heart race or merely made her tired. Today, however, she had stolen a moment of purpose. In her saddlebag sat a heavy envelope containing a bank draft. It was the payment for the interest on the loan her father had taken to keep the ranch afloat during the drought. Thomas Hart had wanted to send a ranch hand, but they were short-staffed, and Carrie had insisted. "I can ride faster than old Pete," she had argued, her chin set in that stubborn line her father simultaneously admired and feared. "And I will not stop for whiskey." So here she was, alone in the vast silence. But the silence of the West was a liar. It was never truly empty. To the north lay the shadow of the Wichita Mountains, where the Comanche people were being slowly, ruthlessly corralled by the United States Army. The government called it a reservation policy. The locals called it a slow death. And to the east lay the iron rails. The railroad was coming, eating up the miles, bringing with it the promise of commerce and the threat of oblivion for anyone who stood in its way. Carrie crested a low ridge, the dry grass crunching beneath Nutmeg's hooves. She paused to let the mare breathe. It was then that she saw the dust cloud. It was small, moving fast, and coming straight for her. Her first instinct was not fear, but calculation. 5 riders. They were riding hard, whipping their horses. Carrie wheeled Nutmeg around, intending to head toward the shallow ravine that led back to the main road. But 2 more riders emerged from the scrub brush to her left, cutting off her retreat. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced her chest. The riders closed in, yipping and howling in a way that sounded like a theatrical performance of wolves. As they drew nearer, Carrie saw the feathers tied into their horses' manes and the paint smeared across their bare chests and faces. Ochre and black stripes. "Comanche," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She kicked Nutmeg into a gallop, aiming for the gap between the 2 groups. The wind tore at her hat, ripping it from her head. Her hair, the color of dark honey, tumbled loose. She leaned low over the mare's neck, urging her on. "Yeah, go, girl." But Nutmeg shied violently as a gunshot cracked the air. It was not an arrow. It was the distinct boom of a heavy revolver. The shot struck the dirt inches from Nutmeg's front hooves. The mare reared, screaming in terror. Carrie fought for control, her gloves slipping on the leather reins. But the momentum was lost. The riders surrounded her, their horses circling, creating a choking wall of dust. One of the men lunged forward and grabbed Nutmeg's bridle, jerking the animal to a halt. Carrie lashed out with her riding crop, striking the man's wrist. "Let go!" she shouted. The man laughed. It was a guttural, ugly sound. He looked up at her, his face obscured by the crude black paint. "Feisty one, ain't she?" Carrie froze. The voice, it was rough, accented with the twang of the Missouri backwoods. She looked closer. The paint on his chest did not hide the farmer's tan lines on his arms. The feather in his hair was a chicken feather, dyed with berry juice. And on his feet, thrust into the stirrups, were not moccasins, but heavy, worn cavalry boots. "You are not Comanche," Carrie said, her voice trembling with rage rather than fear. "You are white men." The man's eyes narrowed behind the mask of paint. "Shut your mouth, girl. We're whatever we say we are." "Grab the bag," another rider shouted. "And spook the horse. Make it look like a raiding party, did it?" "What about her?" the first man asked, leering. "Boss said chaos. Didn't say anything about leaving witnesses." A chill went through Carrie that had nothing to do with the wind. These men were not just thieves. They were actors in a play written in blood. And she was a prop to be discarded. They were staging a massacre to blame the tribes. The man reached for her waist to drag her from the saddle. Carrie screamed, a raw sound of defiance, and raised her crop again. Then, the air hissed. It sounded like it was tearing silk. The man reaching for her suddenly gasped. A long, feathered shaft sprouted from his shoulder. He stared at it in disbelief for 1 second before tumbling backward off his horse. The other riders shouted in confusion, "Sniper, take cover!" But there was no cover. From the ridge above, a figure launched himself into the air. He did not look like the men surrounding Carrie. He moved with a fluidity that made them look like lumbering drunks. He rode a paint horse with no saddle, his knees locked tight to the animal's ribs. He held a short bow, and before the fake raiders could turn their heavy revolvers, 2 more arrows found their marks, one in a thigh, another in a forearm. It was Eshko. He was perhaps 20 years of age, though his face held the composure of an elder. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple calico shirt, open at the chest. His hair was black as a raven's wing, braided with purpose, not costume. Behind him, 3 other Comanche warriors crested the hill, their ululating cries piercing the air, a sound that was authentic, terrifying, and commanded instant respect. The fake raiders panicked. Their disguise was their undoing. They were armed for a robbery, not a war. "They're real ones. They're real Injuns," one of the white men screamed, wheeling his horse around. "Run!" The attackers broke formation, abandoning their wounded comrade who lay groaning in the dirt. They spurred their horses toward the dry creek, desperate to escape the vengeance thundering down on them. Eshko did not pursue them. He pulled his horse up sharply, the animal sliding on its haunches, creating a cloud of grit that shielded Carrie from the retreating gunfire. The other warriors chased the fakes for a few hundred yards, ensuring they would not return, before circling back. Silence descended as quickly as the violence had erupted. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the horses and the groan of the man on the ground with the arrow in his shoulder. Carrie sat frozen on Nutmeg, her chest heaving. She gripped the pommel of her saddle until her knuckles were white. Eshko turned his horse toward her, for the first time. Carrie looked into the face of the enemy. She had been told her whole life that Comanches were monsters, godless savages who killed for sport. She expected to see bloodlust in his eyes. Instead, she saw a profound, steady calm. His eyes were dark, framed by high cheekbones and skin the color of bronze. He did not look at her with hatred, nor with the predatory hunger the white men had shown. He looked at her with a curious, assessing intelligence. He guided his horse closer. Nutmeg, sensing the calm of the other animal, stopped dancing. Eshko looked at the man on the ground, the white man in the painted mask, and then up at Carrie. He gestured toward the fleeing dust cloud with his chin, then spoke in clear, halted English. "They wear my face," he said. His voice was deep, resonating in his chest. "But they have no honor." Carrie found her voice. It was small and shaky. They tried to take the bank draft. They wanted to kill me." Eshko's gaze dropped to her hands. Seeing the way they trembled, he reached out. Carrie flinched. Leaning back, he paused, his hand hovering in the air, showing her he held no weapon. Gently, He reached past her arm and adjusted Nutmeg's bridle, which had twisted in the struggle. "You are hurt?" he asked. "No," Carrie breathed. I don't think so. Go," Eshko said, pointing toward the distant rooftops of the Hart Ranch. "Soldiers come. They will not see truth. They will see only Comanche." He was right. In the distance, from the direction of the fort, a bugle sounded. The heavy thrum of a cavalry charge vibrated through the ground. Eshko signaled to his men. They did not flee in panic like the white impostors. They simply melted away. They turned their horses and vanished into the ravines and the tall grass as if the land itself had swallowed them whole. Moments later, the thunder of hooves announced the arrival of civilization. Major Colton Briggs rode at the head of the column, his blue uniform immaculate despite the dust. He was a handsome man in a sharp, predatory way, with a mustache waxed to perfection and eyes that were cold as polished stones. "Miss Hart," Briggs shouted, leaping from his horse before it had fully stopped. He rushed to her side, his hand gripping her boot possessively. "My God, we heard shots. Are you unharmed?" Carrie looked down at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her lightheaded. Yes, Major, I am safe." Briggs looked around the scene. He saw the churned earth, the arrow in the dirt, and the single dead man, the one Eshko had shot first, lying face down. The other wounded man had managed to crawl away into the brush during the confusion. Briggs walked over to the body. He nudged it with his boot. He saw the paint. He saw the arrow fletching. "Comanche!" Briggs spat, loud enough for his men to hear. "Savages! Attacking a lone woman on the open road. This is an act of war." "No!" Carrie cried out. She struggled to dismount, her legs shaking as they hit the ground. "Major, listen to me. It was not Comanches. Well, it was, but—" Briggs turned to her, his expression shifting from anger to a patronizing softness. "Caroline, calm yourself. You are in shock." "I'm not in shock," Carrie insisted, brushing the dust from her skirts. "I was attacked by white men. Major, they were wearing paint. They had boots on. They were trying to make it look like a raid." Briggs stepped closer, towering over her. "White men dressed as Indians. Caroline, that is absurd." "It is the truth. One of them spoke to me. He had a Missouri accent." "And then?" Briggs asked, his voice lowering, his eyes scanning her face intently. Then the real Comanches came. A young man. He saved me. He shot the imposter." Briggs stared at her for a long moment. Then, a thin, tight smile touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "My dear," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder, squeezing slightly too hard. "You have been through a terrible ordeal. The heat, the fear, the mind plays tricks. You see heroes where there are only villains." He turned to his lieutenant. "The lady is confused. Report that a Comanche raiding party attacked Miss Hart. One hostile neutralized. The rest fled north." "Wait," Carrie grabbed Briggs' forearm. "You cannot report that. It is a lie. The man who saved me." Briggs leaned down, his face close to hers. He smelled of bay rum and stale tobacco. "The man who saved you if a Comanche was here, Miss Hart. He was here to steal, rape, or kill. If you are alive, it is because we arrived in time to scare them off. That is the official report." "But the body?" Carrie pointed to the dead man. "Look at his boots. Look at the paint." "Lieutenant," Briggs barked. "Burial detail, immediately. We do not leave white. We do not leave bodies to rot in the sun, regardless of who they are." He had almost slipped. Carrie heard it. He knew, or he suspected. "Come," Briggs said, guiding her back toward Nutmeg. "I will escort you to your father. He will be distraught." "I can ride myself," Carrie said, pulling away from him. "I insist," Briggs said, and the steel in his voice made it clear it was not a request. The drive back to the Hart Ranch was a blur of resentment and confusion. When they arrived, Thomas Hart was waiting on the porch, his face pale. He was a good man, worn down by years of fighting the elements, and he loved his daughter more than the land itself. "Carrie," He ran to her as she dismounted. Briggs told me. Comanches, good Lord, child, I told you not to ride alone. Father, it wasn't, Carrie started, but Briggs stepped in. A raiding party. Mr. Hart, vicious, but your daughter was brave. My men drove them off. Thomas Hart gripped Briggs's hand, shaking it vigorously. Thank you, Major, thank you. I don't know what I would do if... He choked on the words, turning to hug Carrie tightly. Carrie stood stiff in her father's embrace, over his shoulder. She saw Briggs watching her. There was a warning in his eyes. Be a good girl, the look said. Be the victim. Do not complicate things. Later that evening, the sun set in a blaze of bloody orange. Carrie sat in her room, staring into the small vanity mirror. There was a smear of dirt on her cheek and a small scratch on her neck where the fake raider's fingernail had grazed her. She picked up a washcloth and dipped it in the basin. The water was cool. She scrubbed the dirt away, but she could not scrub away the memory. She remembered the chaos, the screaming, the gunshot, but mostly, she remembered the silence that followed. She closed her eyes and saw him. Eshko. She saw the way he sat on his horse, as if he were part of the animal. She saw the lean muscle of his arm as he held the bow. She saw the restraint in his posture. They wear my face, but they have no honor. He had spoken to her not as a conquest, and not as a fragile thing to be protected, but as a human being witnessing a crime. Downstairs, she could hear the murmur of voices. Major Briggs was drinking whiskey with her father. They were talking about security, about clearing the valley, about the railroad contracts that would make the land worth $10 an acre instead of 50 cents. We have to drive them out. Thomas, Briggs was saying, his voice carrying through the floorboards. Today proves it. They are a menace to our women, to civilization. Carrie walked to her window. The night air was cooling, carrying the scent of sagebrush and impending danger. She looked out toward the north, toward the dark silhouette of the hills where the Comanche fires might be burning. She had been saved by the enemy from her own kind. The official story was a lie. The safety of the fort was a lie. Even the polite society she lived in felt like a lie, a mask painted over a face of greed. She touched the glass of the window. She should be afraid. She should be grateful to be inside, safe behind thick walls. But her heart was still out there on the prairie, beating in time with the hoofbeats of a painted horse. For the first time in her life, Carrie Hart did not want to be safe. She wanted to know the truth, and the truth had dark eyes, a steady hand, and a name she did not yet know. She turned away from the window, blowing out the kerosene lamp. The room plunged into darkness, but Carrie felt wider awake than she had in years. The war had come to her doorstep, but she would not fight it on their terms. She would not be the damsel in the Major's story. If they wanted a fight, she would give them one. But first, she had to find the warrior who had looked at her and seen something worth saving. The night was quiet, but in the distance, a coyote howled. To the soldiers, it was a lonely sound. To Carrie, it sounded like an invitation. The mess hall at Fort McCavitt smelled of stale tobacco smoke, unwashed wool, and the nervous sweat of desperate men. It was 3 days after the attack on the road, and the atmosphere in the room was tight enough to snap a fiddle string. Major Colton Briggs had summoned every rancher within a 20-mile radius, and they had packed into the long, wooden building, their hats in their hands and their eyes wide with anxiety. Caroline Hart sat on a hard bench beside her father. Thomas, she kept her spine rigid, her hands folded demurely in her lap. But beneath the lace of her gloves, her fingernails were digging into her palms. At the front of the room, Major Briggs stood before a large, hand-drawn map of the valley. He looked like the very image of martial competence, his uniform pressed, his boots polished to a shine that mocked the dusty reality of the men he was addressing. "Gentlemen," Briggs began, his voice booming with practiced authority, "I did not call you here to waste your time. We all know the situation. The frontier is bleeding." He gestured to a table beside him. On it lay a collection of grim artifacts, a broken arrow, a beaded moccasin, and a bloody saddle blanket. These items were recovered from the site where Miss Hart was attacked. Briggs lied. He said it smoothly, without a flicker of hesitation. Comanche markings, unmistakable. It is a miracle that Thomas's daughter is sitting here with us today. Most women would not have been so fortunate. A murmur went through the crowd. Men shook their heads, muttering curses against the tribe. Thomas Hart reached out and patted Carrie's hand, his face lined with worry. Carrie felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. It was not embarrassment. It was the hot, prickly sting of injustice. However, Briggs continued, raising a hand in silence. We have a solution. The War Department has authorized me to take decisive action. We are going to cleanse the valley. He slapped his hand against the map, right over the area marked as the Wichita Mountains. We move in 2 weeks, Briggs announced. We will strike their winter camp. We will drive them onto the reservation where they belong, or we will drive them into the ground. Once the area is secure, the railroad company has guaranteed immediate expansion. That means land value increases by up to 300%. It means security for your families. It means civilization. The promise of money hung in the air, seductive and sweet. Carrie saw her father's eyes light up. The debt that hung over the Hart Ranch was a heavy stone around his neck. Briggs was offering to cut the rope. Carrie could not stay silent. The image of the young warrior, Eshko, and his steady, intelligent eyes flashed in her mind. He had saved her. And now, the man who had likely orchestrated the attack was using it as an excuse to slaughter Eshko's people. She stood up. The movement was sudden, and the rustle of her skirts sounded impossibly loud in the quiet room. Major Briggs, Carrie said. Her voice shook slightly, but she forced it to steady. Briggs stopped mid-sentence. He looked at her with a mask of polite indulgence, the way one might look at a child interrupting a sermon. Miss Hart, perhaps you should remain seated. This is grim business. It is dishonest business, Carrie said, her voice gaining strength. Those items on the table, that arrow, it was not there when I left the scene. The room went dead silent. Thomas tugged at her skirt. Carrie, sit down. She ignored him. She looked directly at the other ranchers. The men who attacked me were wearing paint, yes, but they were white men. One of them had blue eyes. He spoke with a Missouri accent, and when the real Comanche warriors arrived, they did not attack me. They saved me. She pointed a gloved finger at Briggs. The Major knows this. I told him. Briggs did not look angry. Instead, he looked pitying. He shook his head slowly, a sad smile playing on his lips. Gentlemen, Briggs said softly, addressing the crowd while keeping his eyes on her. You must forgive Miss Hart. She has been through a terrifying ordeal. Heat exhaustion, panic, the chaos of a skirmish. The mind creates narratives to protect itself. It is a common affliction among the fairer sex when exposed to violence. I am not afflicted, Carrie snapped. I saw what I saw. The dead man had cavalry boots on. The dead man was a renegade half-breed. Briggs countered smoothly. We have identified him. A known associate of the Comanche raiding parties? As for the heroic Indian you speak of, well, he chuckled, a low, dry sound that invited the other men to join in. It is a romantic notion, Miss Hart, the noble savage. But I assure you, the only thing a Comanche warrior wants from a white woman is her scalp or her virtue. You fainted, my dear. You woke up when my men arrived. The rest is a fever dream. Laughter rippled through the room. It was not cruel laughter, but dismissive. It was the sound of men agreeing that women were fragile creatures who could not be trusted to understand the harsh realities of war. Sit down, Caroline, Thomas Hart hissed, his voice sharp with humiliation. He stood up and gripped her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. That is enough. Father, he is lying, Carrie whispered desperately. I said enough. Thomas roared. He dragged her toward the door. Carrie stumbled, humiliated, her face burning. As she was pulled from the room, she looked back. Major Briggs was watching her. The pity was gone from his face. In its place was a cold, harsh warning. He had won. He had turned her truth into a symptom of hysteria. Outside, the night air was cool, but it did not cool Carrie's temper. Thomas marched her to their wagon and practically threw her onto the seat. "How could you?" Thomas demanded, pacing in the dirt. "In front of everyone, in front of the bank's representatives? I was telling the truth," Carrie cried. "Those soldiers are going to massacre innocent people because of a lie." "Innocent," Thomas spat. "They are Indians. Carrie, they have been stealing our cattle for 10 years. If Briggs wants to clear them out, I say good riddance. And if it saves this ranch, then I will thank him for it." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of coffee and anxiety. "You listen to me. We are on the edge of ruin. I have 100 head of cattle left. The bank holds the paper on everything. Briggs is offering us a lifeline. You will not cut it. You will not speak of this again. You will go home. You will attend to your needlepoint, and you will leave the business of war to men." He climbed onto the wagon seat and snapped the reins. "Giddy up." The ride home was silent. Carrie stared at the dark horizon. She felt a profound sense of isolation. Her father loved her, she knew that, but he did not see her. To him and to Briggs, she was an asset to be protected, or a liability to be managed. She was not a person with a voice, but she was not crazy. She knew what she had seen. That night, the silence of the ranch house was oppressive. The clock in the hallway chimed 12 times. Midnight. Carrie lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She could not let it stand. If Briggs attacked the village based on a lie she had inadvertently helped create, the blood would be on her hands as much as his. She needed proof. Briggs had said the dead man was a renegade half-breed. But she remembered the second man, the one who had been shot in the shoulder and crawled away. If he was still out there, or if he had left something behind. She threw back the quilt. 10 minutes later, she was slipping out the back door. She wore her riding split skirt and a dark wool coat. She did not take Nutmeg. The mare was skittish at night. Instead, she took a sturdy roan gelding named Buster who had a soft tread. She rode west, toward the dry creek bed. The moon was a waxing gibbous, providing just enough light to see the scrub brush as silver skeletons against the black earth. The journey took an hour. When she arrived at the ambush site, the wind had picked up, whistling through the ravine like a mourning ghost. Carrie dismounted and tied Buster to a mesquite bush. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was dangerous. If a patrol found her, her reputation would be ruined. If the real raiders were still around, her life would be over. She knelt in the dirt, searching. The soldiers had cleaned up the body, but the ground was still churned. She looked for the spot where the second man had fallen. "What do you search for, Caroline Hart?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Carrie spun around, gasping, her hand flying to the small knife she had concealed in her belt. A shadow detached itself from the darkness of the creek bank. It was him. Eshko stood 10 feet away. He was painted for night, his face smeared with ash to reduce the shine of his skin in the moonlight. He held his bow loosely in his left hand, but there was no arrow nocked. "How do you know my name?" Carrie asked, her voice trembling. "The wind carries many things," Eshko said softly. He stepped closer, moving with a silence that was unnerving. "And the soldiers talk loud when they think they are alone." Carrie lowered her hand from the knife. She realized with a jolt that she was not afraid of him. She should be terrified, standing alone in the dark with a Comanche warrior. But the fear would not come. Instead, she felt a strange, electric pull, a sense of recognition. "They are going to kill you," Carrie said. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Major Briggs, he had a meeting. In 2 weeks, they are coming to the valley. He says your people attacked me." Eshko's expression did not change. He looked at her with a profound sadness that made him look older than his years. "He needs a reason," Eshko said. "The wolf does not need a reason to eat the sheep, but the white man needs a reason to take the land. It makes his spirit feel clean." "I tried to tell them," Carrie said, stepping forward. "I stood up in the meeting. I told them it was white men in paint. They laughed at me. My father. She stopped, looking down at her boots. My father told me to be silent. Eshko tilted his head. But you are not silent. You are here, in the dark. Why? Because it is not right, Carrie said, looking up, her eyes fierce. I am not a sheep, and I am not a liar. I wanted to find proof. The second man, the one you shot in the shoulder, he got away. If I can find him, if I can prove he is white. Eshko shook his head slowly. He is dead. His own kind killed him before they reached the town. Dead men tell no tales. Carrie felt a cold pit open in her stomach. Then there is no proof. There is truth, Eshko said. But your people do not value truth as much as they value gold. He walked past her, moving toward the edge of the ravine where the moonlight hit the white limestone rocks. He motioned for her to follow. Come, I'll show you. Carrie hesitated for only a second. She followed him. He pointed to the north, toward the jagged silhouette of the mountains. My people are hungry. The buffalo are gone. The soldiers kill them and leave the meat to rot, just to starve us. Now, we are squeezed into a corner. If we fight, we die. If we do not fight, we starve. He turned to face her. The distance between them was less than an arm's length. Carrie could smell the scent of wood smoke and sage on his skin. This Major Briggs, Eshko said. He works for the Iron Road, the railroad man. A man with a silver cane, met with Briggs in the dark. My scouts saw them. They trade paper for blood. The railroad, Carrie realized. That is why he promised the land value would rise. It is a business deal. It is a murder deal, Eshko corrected. He looked deep into her eyes. I cannot stop the army. I have 50 bows. They have 500 rifles. But if the men of the valley know they are being used, maybe they do not ride with the soldiers. Maybe the war will slow down. You want me to tell them? Carrie asked. They won't listen to me. I am just a woman. You are the daughter of the Hart Ranch, Eshko said. You have eyes. You have a voice. Use it. It is dangerous, Carrie whispered. If Briggs finds out I am meeting with you, he could arrest me. My father would disown me. Yes, Eshko agreed. He did not sugarcoat it. It is dangerous. It is safer to go back to your house, to sew your clothes, to marry a man you do not love. The words struck Carrie like a physical blow. How could he see so clearly into her life? Why trust me, she asked. I am white. I am the enemy. Eshko reached out. For a moment, she thought he would touch her face, and her breath hitched, but he merely pointed to her chest, over her heart. Because you came back, he said. The others ran away. You came back to the place of fear to find the truth. That is not the heart of an enemy. That is the heart of a warrior. He stepped back, fading into the shadows as if he were made of smoke. 2 weeks. Caroline Hart, he said, his voice drifting back to her. Warn them, or the river will run red. And then he was gone. Carrie stood alone in the ravine. The silence rushed back in, but it felt different now. It was heavy with responsibility. She walked back to her horse, her legs feeling unsteady. She mounted Buster and turned him toward home. As she rode, the internal conflict raged within her. On one side lay her duty to her father. Thomas Hart was a proud man, but he was brittle. He needed the security Briggs offered. If she undermined the campaign, she might destroy her family's future. She would be a pariah in Dry Creek. She would be the Indian lover, a label that carried a fate worse than death in social circles. On the other side lay the truth. She thought of the young man with calm eyes. She thought of the railroad man with the silver cane, a phantom investor pulling strings, willing to kill entire families for a right of way. She remembered the feeling of the sun on her face when she rode alone, that feeling of freedom. It was the same feeling she had when Eshko looked at her, a feeling that she was not a doll to be placed on a shelf, but a living, breathing soul capable of action. Carrie looked at the moon. I am not a sheep, she whispered to the empty prairie. She made her choice. She would not be the silent victim Major Briggs wanted her to be. She would be the spy in the parlor. She would find the proof of the railroad deal. She would uncover the identity of the man with the silver cane. And she would make her father listen, even if she had to scream. She kicked Buster into a gallop. She was riding back toward the cage of her life. But this time, she was bringing the key. The inciting incident had passed. The story had truly begun. She was no longer just witnessing history. She was going to change it. The wind whipped her hair, and for the first time in her 22 years, the vast, terrifying darkness of the West did not feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. But as the lights of the Hart Ranch flickered into view, Carrie knew the hardest part was not facing the Comanche warrior in the dark. It was facing the man she called father in the light of day, knowing she was about to betray everything he believed in to save his soul. The sun hung high and white over the expansive Texas prairie, bleaching the color from the scrub grass until the world looked like an old, overexposed photograph. To the casual observer, Caroline Hart was simply a dutiful daughter riding the fence line of the Hart Ranch, checking for breaks in the wire where cattle might stray. She wore her wide-brimmed hat pulled low and her work gloves, and she rode Nutmeg at a sensible trot. But inside her chest, her heart was beating a rhythm that had nothing to do with ranch work. It was a frantic, terrified, exhilarating drumbeat. She was going to the enemy. Once she was sure she was beyond the sight of the ranch hands and well clear of the patrols from the fort. Carrie turned Nutmeg west, toward the river. The Red River was not just a body of water here. It was a scar in the earth, a shifting, muddy boundary between the known world of law and order, and the vast, terrifying unknown of the Indian Territory. She reached the line of cottonwood trees that marked the meeting place. For a long 10 minutes, there was only the sound of the wind rattling the dry leaves and the rush of the water. Doubt began to creep in, cold and insidious. Perhaps he would not come. Perhaps she was a fool, a naive girl walking into a trap, just as Major Briggs had said. Then, a bird called out a sharp, 3-note whistle that did not belong to any bird native to this valley. Eshko stepped out from behind a limestone outcrop. He was not on his horse this time. He stood on the ground, one hand resting on the hilt of his knife, the other hanging loose by his side. He looked different in the daylight. Without the shadows of the night to cloak him, Carrie could see the dust on his skin, the intricate beadwork on his moccasins, and the watchful intelligence in his dark eyes. "You came," he said. It was not a question, but an acknowledgement. "I said I would," Carrie replied, struggling to keep her voice steady as she dismounted. "I am not a liar. Eshko." He nodded once. "Leave the horse. The mare is too loud. We walk from here." "Walk." Carrie looked at the river. "Across. There is a ford," Eshko said, "hidden by the reeds. But we go on foot. My people will hear a shod horse from a mile away." He turned and began to descend the bank. Carrie hesitated. Crossing that water meant leaving behind everything she was Caroline Hart, the rancher's daughter, the civilized woman. On the other hand, she was nobody. She was vulnerable. She looked back toward the east, toward her home. Then she looked at Eshko's broad back. He stopped and looked over his shoulder. He did not mock her hesitation. He simply waited. Carrie took a breath that tasted of river mud and sage, and she followed him. The water was cool, swirling around her boots as they crossed the hidden stone path. When she stepped onto the far bank, a strange sensation washed over her. The air did not feel different. The sun was just as hot, but the silence was deeper here. It felt ancient. She had crossed the invisible line. She had stepped out of her cage. They walked for an hour through a landscape of red rock canyons and hidden valleys. Eshko moved with a silence that made Carrie feel clumsy and loud, though she tried her best to step where he stepped. When they finally crested a ridge, Eshko signaled for her to stay low. "Look," he whispered. Below them, nestled in a bowl-shaped valley protected by sheer cliff walls, lay the village. Carrie had been raised on stories of Comanche camps, tales of filth, screaming captives, and savage rituals. Major Briggs called them nests of vipers. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. It was a scene of profound domesticity. Dozens of teepees painted with symbols of stars and animals were arranged in a precise circle. Smoke curled lazily from the tops of the lodges, carrying the scent of roasting meat. She saw children chasing each other with sticks, their laughter drifting up on the wind, sounding exactly like the laughter of the children in the schoolyard at Dry Creek. She saw women sitting together, scraping hides and talking, their hands moving in practiced rhythms. She saw old men sitting in the shade, smoking pipes. It was not a war camp. It was a home. "It is peaceful," Carrie whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop it. Eshko looked at her, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Major Briggs calls us wolves, but wolves also have dens. Wolves also love their pups." He let her down. As they entered the village, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter stopped. Eyes turned toward them, dark, suspicious eyes. A silence rippled through the camp, heavy and tense. A white woman walking freely among them was an anomaly, a danger. A woman with silver-streaked hair stepped forward from a lodge near the center. She held a scraping tool in her hand, gripping it like a weapon. She looked at Eshko, then at Carrie, and spoke a sharp string of words in Comanche. Eshko answered her, his voice calm and respectful. He gestured to Carrie, then to the east, then touched his own chest. The woman's gaze softened, only a fraction, but she stepped back. "That is my mother," Eshko said quietly to Carrie. "She asks if I have brought a prisoner or a ghost." I told her I brought a witness. He led her to the largest lodge, where an old man sat on a buffalo robe. His face was a map of wrinkles, etched deep by 90 years of sun and wind, but his eyes were clear. This was Gray Owl. Eshko motioned for Carrie to sit. She did so, tucking her skirts around her legs, feeling the eyes of the village on her back. "You are the daughter of Thomas Hart," Gray Owl said. His English was slow, thick with an accent, but understandable. "Your father's cattle eat my grass." "My father believes this land belongs to him by deed," Carrie said, trying to be respectful but firm. "Paper." Gray Owl scoffed gently. "The white man thinks paper can hold the wind. He thinks ink can stop the river." Eshko sat beside Carrie, translating the deeper meanings. "My uncle says that for 3 years, men have come in the night. They burn a ranch, they steal horses, and they leave arrows that belong to my people. But the fletching is wrong. The knots are wrong. We do not tie our knots that way." "Why?" Carrie asked. "Why would they do that?" "Because of the iron horse," Gray Owl said. "The railroad. The man with the silver cane came to see us 2 winters ago. He offered us whiskey and blankets to leave. We said no. This is the place of our ancestors' bones. We do not sell our grandfathers." Eshko leaned forward, picking up a stick and drawing in the dirt. "Since then, the raids began. Every time a ranch is burned, the soldiers come closer. They build fences. They push us. Now, Major Briggs says we are the attackers. He wants a war so he can clear the valley for the tracks. Briggs is working with them," Carrie realized, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "He is not protecting the settlers. He is clearing the board for the investors. He creates a villain," Eshko said, looking at her, "so he can be the hero who destroys it." Carrie felt a wave of nausea. The duplicity was so vast, so calculated. "My father. He does not know. He thinks he is fighting for his life." "Fear makes men blind," Gray Owl said. He looked at Carrie with a penetrating gaze. "Eshko says you have eyes that see. Is this true?" "I want to see," Carrie said. "I want to stop the killing." The old man nodded slowly. "Then you are welcome at this fire, Caroline Hart. But know this, the storm is coming. A small bird cannot stop the thunder." They spent the afternoon in the camp. Carrie watched, listened, and learned. She saw the poverty forced upon them by the dwindling buffalo herds. She saw the way Eshko played with his younger brother, tossing a leather ball, his face lighting up with a boyish grin she had never seen before. It broke her heart to see how human they were, knowing that a few miles away, men were loading cannons to destroy them. As evening fell, the sky turned a bruised purple. The air grew cool. Eshko led Carrie away from the main circle to a small corral where the horses were kept. He whistled, and a paint stallion trotted over. The horse had no saddle, only a simple rope halter. "You ride well for a white woman," Eshko said, leaning against the wooden fence. "But you ride stiff. You fight the horse." Carrie smiled, a little defensive. "I ride how I was taught. Side saddle is proper for a lady." "Proper." Eshko repeated the word as if tasting it. "Proper is for tea parties. Proper gets you killed on the prairie. To survive, you must be one with the beast." He opened the gate and led the stallion out. "Tonight, you'll learn to ride like Comanche. No saddle, no stirrups to trap your feet." Carrie looked at the horse's sleek, broad back. It looked slippery and impossibly high. "I cannot do that. I will slide right off." "You will not," Eshko said. "You have balance. I watched you cross the river on the stones. Your body knows what to do. Your mind is just afraid." He patted the horse's neck. "Up." Carrie hesitated. She looked at the horse, then at Eshko. The firelight from the distant camp flickered in his eyes, making them dance. He looked wild and dangerous, yet entirely safe. "I have never done this before," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet evening. Eshko stepped closer. He entered her personal space, bringing with him the heat of his body and the scent of wood smoke. He did not back away. He placed one hand firmly on the horse's withers and extended the other toward her waist. He smiled, a slow, genuine expression that made her breath hitch in her throat. "Then let me show you." His hand settled on her waist. His grip was firm, possessing a strength that was restrained but undeniable. Through the fabric of her riding habit, his touch felt like a brand. "Put your hands on my shoulders," he instructed softly. Carrie reached out. His shoulders were hard muscle beneath his buckskin shirt. She felt the steady thump of his heart, or perhaps it was her own pulse hammering in her ears. "Jump on 3, he said. He counted, and on 3, he lifted her. She sprang up, swinging her leg over the horse. It felt scandalous to sit astride, her skirts bunching up, her legs gripping the warm, living barrel of the animal. Without the saddle, she could feel every breath the horse took. It was intimate and terrifying. "I am slipping," she gasped, clutching the mane. "No," Eshko said. He did not let go of her. He stood right beside her leg, his hand moving from her waist to rest on her thigh, just above her knee. "Relax your legs. Do not grip so hard. Let your weight sink down, like water." His voice was a low rumble. Carrie tried to obey. She exhaled, forcing her muscles to loosen. Eshko's hand was warm and steady. He adjusted her leg, shifting her position slightly. "Better," he murmured. He looked up at her. Their faces were inches apart. In the twilight, the rest of the world fell away. There was no fort, no ranch, no war. Just the man, the woman, and the horse beneath them. "Now," Eshko said, "we ride." Before she could protest, he vaulted up behind her in one fluid motion. Carrie gasped as his chest pressed against her back. He was solid and warm, enclosing her. His arms came around her to take the rope reins, effectively trapping her in his embrace. "Lean back," he whispered against her ear. "Trust me." Carrie leaned back. She let her head rest against his shoulder. It was the most forbidden thing she had ever done, and it felt like the only right thing she had ever done. Eshko clicked his tongue, and the stallion surged forward. They rode out of the valley and onto the high plains. The wind whipped Carrie's hair, blowing it back into Eshko's face. They moved as one entity, man, woman, and horse fused together. Without the saddle, the motion was fluid, a rolling gait that felt like flying. Carrie felt tears prick her eyes. This was freedom. This was what she had been looking for when she stared out of her window at the ranch. Not just the open land, but the connection, the feeling of being held by something stronger than fear. Eshko did not speak. He guided the horse with his knees, his arms holding her steady. Every time the horse turned, his body shifted against hers. a silent communication of weight and balance. It was a dance, primal and pure. They rode until the moon was high and bright, turning the grass to silver. Finally, Eshko slowed the horse to a walk and turned back toward the overlook above the river, the boundary line. He slid off the horse first, then reached up to help her down. When her feet touched the ground, her legs were trembling, but not from fatigue. She stood close to him, her hands still resting on his arms. The air between them was charged, thick with unspoken words and a magnetic pull that terrified her. Eshko looked down at her. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, rough skin against soft. "You ride with the spirit of the wind." "Caroline," he said softly. Carrie leaned into his touch, closing her eyes for a brief second. She wanted to stay here. She wanted to disappear into the darkness with him and never go back to the world of corsets and lies. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. Eshko's hand dropped. His face became serious. The warrior returning to replace the lover. "You must," he said. "If you stay, you are just one more person for me to hide. One more person Briggs will kill to get to." He gestured toward the lights of the distant ranch flickering in the east. "You have a shield I do not have. You have white skin. You have their ear." "They won't listen," Carrie said bitterly. "They will not listen to words." Eshko agreed. "They need proof. Briggs is clever. He hides his tracks. But every soldier follows a drum. Find out where the drum beats next." Carrie straightened her spine. The magic of the ride was fading, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. But the strength Eshko had shown her the balance. The trust remained. "He keeps a ledger," Carrie said, thinking fast, "in his office. And there are marching orders. If he plans a big attack, he has to coordinate with the supply wagons. There will be a schedule." "Find the place," Eshko said. "Find where he plans to stage his theater of blood. If we know the place, we can change the play." "I will get it," Carrie vowed. "I will get the schedule." Eshko looked at her with intense gratitude. "It is a dangerous thing I ask of you. If they catch you." "If they catch me, I am a foolish girl who got lost," Carrie said, a hard edge entering her voice. "But if they catch you, you are a dead man. Let me take the risk inside the walls." Eshko nodded. He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small, smooth stone carved with the shape of a turtle. He pressed it into her hand. "For protection," he said. "The turtle is hard. It endures. Like you." He helped her mount Nutmeg, who had been waiting tethered in the brush. "Go now," Eshko said, slapping the mare's rump lightly. "Before the moon sets." Carrie rode away. She did not look back, because she knew if she did, she might not have the strength to leave. She rode back toward the Hart Ranch, toward the father who wanted to sell her to a rich husband, toward the major who wanted to burn the world for a profit. But she was different now. She could still feel the phantom warmth of Eshko's arms around her, the rhythm of the paint stallion in her bones. She had crossed the river. She had ridden with the enemy and found a home. She was no longer just Caroline Hart, the rancher's daughter. She was a woman who had learned to ride without a saddle, and she would never let anyone put a bit in her mouth again. As the dark shape of the ranch house loomed ahead, Carrie gripped the turtle stone in her pocket. She had a war to stop, and she knew exactly how she was going to start. She would walk into the lion's den, smile her prettiest smile, and steal the teeth right out of its mouth. The ride back to Dry Creek felt less like a return home and more like entering a prison yard where the guards had already decided on the sentence. As Caroline Hart rode Nutmeg past the perimeter of Fort McCavitt, she felt the weight of eyes upon her. 2 sentries stood by the gate, their blue uniforms dusty from the relentless wind. They did not tip their hats as they usually did. Instead, they leaned on their rifles, exchanging whispers that carried on the dry air. "She rides out alone a lot lately," one muttered, spitting a stream of brown tobacco juice into the dirt. "Miles past the grazing line. Maybe she likes the wild," the other replied, his laugh low and suggestive. or the wild things living in it? Carrie kept her chin high, refusing to acknowledge them, but the shame burned the back of her neck. The town was small. Gossip moved faster than a telegraph wire. By the time she tethered Nutmeg at the hitching post in front of the general store, she could feel the change in the atmosphere. Mrs. Higgins, the baker's wife, crossed the street to avoid her. The blacksmith stopped his hammering to watch her pass. They looked at her not as the respectable daughter of Thomas Hart, but as something tainted, something other. When she arrived at the Hart Ranch, the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Major Colton Briggs' black stallion was tied to the porch. Carrie walked into the parlor to find her father sitting in his armchair, looking 10 years older than he had at breakfast. Major Briggs stood by the fireplace, a glass of her father's best whiskey in his hand. He looked at Carrie as she entered, his gaze traveling slowly from her dusty boots to her wind-blown hair. It was a look of ownership, cold and calculating. "Caroline," Briggs said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "We were just discussing your safety." "My safety seems to be the only topic of conversation these days," Carrie replied, pulling off her gloves. "I am quite capable of looking after myself, Major." Briggs stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of bay rum and the faint, metallic scent of gun oil. "Are you my scouts found hoof prints near the river crossing? Shod horse meeting an unshod pony." They stood close, Caroline, very close. He let the silence hang, heavy and accusatory. Thomas Hart stared at the floor, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair until his knuckles turned white. "You are a reckless girl," Briggs whispered, leaning down so only she could hear. "Playing games with savages. Do you know what they do to white women, or perhaps that is what you are curious about?" Carrie felt a flash of pure rage. She wanted to slap the smug look off his face, but she saw the trap. If she reacted, she confirmed his suspicions. "I water my horse at the river, Major," she said coldly. "If Comanches water theirs at the same place, I cannot stop them, but I have seen no one." Briggs smiled, a thin lifting of his lips that did not reach his dead eyes. "Of course, but rumors are dangerous things. My dear, they can ruin a reputation. They can ruin a ranch." He turned to Thomas. "Keep her close. Thomas, the operation begins soon. We cannot have liabilities wandering the battlefield." When Briggs left, the explosion came. Thomas Hart stood up and slammed his hand onto the side table, rattling the kerosene lamp. "You are forbidden to leave this house," he roared. "Do you hear me, forbidden?" "Father, he is manipulating you," Carrie cried. "He is using these rumors to scare you into selling the land rights." "He is trying to save my dignity," Thomas shouted back. "Do you know what they are saying in town? That my daughter is that she has lost her virtue to a redskin. I will not have it. Caroline, I will not be the laughingstock of Texas." He took a breath, his chest heaving. "I've spoken to Elias Ford. He has agreed to the union. You will marry him before the month is out. He is a good man. He will keep you safe, and he will keep you indoors." Carrie stared at him in horror. Elias Ford was a widower of 50 years, a man with a face like dried apple skin and a soul made of ledger books. "You would sell me to Elias Ford to save your pride." "To save your life," Thomas pleaded, his anger breaking into desperation. "And to save this ranch. Ford has money. With him, we don't need the railroad. We don't need Briggs." "It is the only way. Carrie," he turned his back on her. "Go to your room. You do not ride Nutmeg again, not until you are Mrs. Ford." Carrie went to her room, but she did not weep. The tears had dried up, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted to lock her away. They wanted to trade her like a head of cattle. She waited until 2 o'clock in the morning. The house was silent. Carrie dressed in her darkest clothes. She did not go to the stables. Her father would have the hands watching the horses. Instead, she walked. She walked the 3 miles to the town of Dry Creek, keeping to the shadows of the mesquite brush. The town was asleep, save for the saloon, the bucket of blood, where piano music and drunken laughter still spilled out into the street. Carrie knew Major Briggs' habits. He held court at the saloon until closing, buying drinks for the local politicians and railroad men. That meant his office at the fort was empty. She slipped past the drowsy sentry at the rear of the stockade, a boy of no more than 17 who was more interested in rolling a cigarette than watching the fence line. She moved through the shadows of the barracks, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Briggs's office was in the main command building. The door was locked, but Carrie knew the window latch was faulty. She had seen the major struggle with it once when she visited with her father. She used her pocket knife to slide the latch up. It clicked, and the window swung open. She climbed inside. The office smelled of stale cigar smoke and ambition. Carrie lit a match, shielding the flame with her cupped hand. She moved to the heavy oak desk. Papers were everywhere. Requisitions for ammunition. Letters to a man named Vanderbilt in New York. And there, under a paperweight made of a spent cannonball, was a map. She unfolded it. It was a detailed topographical map of the Red River Valley. A thick red line was drawn through the center, marking the proposed railroad route. But there was another mark, a black X at a narrow canyon known as Raven Pass. Next to it, a note in Briggs's sharp handwriting, Unit B to secure ridge. Explosives to be set at the northern choke point. Flush targets into pass at 0800 hours. Friday. It was a slaughter pen. They weren't going to attack the village directly. They were going to lure the Comanche warriors into the pass and bury them under tons of rock. Suddenly, footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. Carrie blew out the match. The darkness rushed back in, thick and suffocating. The doorknob turned. She dove under the desk, pressing herself into the tight space where the chair usually sat. The door opened. Heavy boots stepped onto the wooden floor. A lantern flared to life, casting long, swinging shadows across the room. "I could have sworn I saw a light, Corporal," a voice grumbled. It was not Briggs. It was a junior officer. "Probably just a reflection from the moon. Sergeant," another voice replied. The boots walked around the desk. Carrie held her breath. She could see the scuffed leather of the sergeant's boots inches from her face. A spider crawled across her hand, but she did not flinch. She willed her heart to stop beating so loudly. The sergeant paused. He placed a hand on the desk, right above her head. The wood creaked. "Leave the lantern," the sergeant said. "If anyone is sneaking around, they won't try it with a light on." "Yes, sir." The boots retreated. The door closed. The lock clicked. Carrie let out a breath that was more a sob than a sigh. She waited 10 minutes, counting the seconds in her head. Before she crawled out, she folded the map and shoved it into her bodice. She climbed out the window, leaving the lantern burning a ghost light for a ghost thief. The next day, the sky wept. A cold, gray rain swept across the plains, turning the dust to slick red mud. It was the kind of weather that made men stay indoors and drink coffee. But Carrie was not indoors. She rode Buster, the reliable gelding, claiming she was taking a basket of food to the widow Miller at the edge of the property. But she rode past the widow's house, toward the narrow slot canyon where the shadows were deep even at noon. Eshko was waiting. He stood under the overhang of a limestone cliff, water dripping from the fringe of his buckskin shirt. He looked wet and miserable, but when he saw her, his face transformed. "You came in the storm," he said, stepping out to help her down. "I have the map," Carrie said, her voice tight. She pulled the damp parchment from her coat. "Briggs plans to trap you. At Raven Pass, Friday morning." Eshko took the map. He studied it, the rain mingling with the ink. His jaw tightened. "A box canyon. He wants to crush us with the mountain itself." "He has explosives," Carrie explained. "He will blow the cliffs when your men ride in." Eshko looked at her. "You have saved many lives today. Caroline Hart, my brother would have been in that pass." He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small leather strip, beaded with white and blue stones. He tied it around her wrist. "This is not just a gift," he said. "It is a mark. If you meet my people, show them this. They will know you are a friend to the wolf." Carrie looked at the bracelet. "I want to do more. Eshko, I want to take this map to the judge in Austin. I want to testify." "No," Eshko said sharply. "The judge in Austin eats dinner with the railroad men. If you go there, you disappear. Or they put you in a place for broken minds." "So I do nothing," Carrie cried, the frustration boiling over. "I let them call me a traitor. My father is marrying me off to Elias Ford. I am to be a prisoner in my own life." "Better a prisoner than a corpse," Eshko said. "I would rather be dead than live a lie." Carrie stepped toward him, her chest heaving. "I am tired of being safe. Eshko, I want to be brave. Like you." The rain hammered down around them, isolating them in a curtain of water. Eshko looked at her, his resolve crumbling under the force of her spirit. "You are brave," he whispered. "Braver than any warrior I know." He stepped closer. The air between them crackled, hotter than the lightning flashing overhead. They were two people from warring worlds, huddled under a rock while the sky fell down. Eshko reached out and cupped her face. His hands were cold from the rain, but his touch burned. Carrie leaned into him, seeking the warmth of his body. She grabbed the lapels of his shirt, pulling him down. "Eshko," she breathed. He kissed her. It was not the polite, dry peck on the cheek she had received from suitors at church dances. It was urgent. It was clumsy and fierce and tasted of rain and desperation. It was a kiss that acknowledged they might die tomorrow, so they had to live right now. Eshko wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest. Carrie melted into him, the hard lines of his body pressing against her softness. For a moment, there was no white, no red, no war. There was only the frantic beating of two hearts and the heat of their breath mingling in the cold air. The world faded to black around them, leaving only the sound of the rain and the feeling of being found. The next morning, the storm had passed, but a different storm had arrived at the Hart Ranch. Major Briggs sat in the parlor again. This time, he was not smiling. He held a piece of paper in his hand. "We found a button," Briggs said, placing a small pearl button on the table. "On the floor of my office, it matches the dress your daughter wore to Sunday service." Thomas Hart stared at the button. He looked at Carrie, his face ashen. "She was in my office," Briggs said, his voice like a hammer. "And a map is missing, a map of a military operation." He stood up and walked to the window. "I have been lenient, Thomas, but this is treason. Communicating with the enemy. Espionage. If I report this, Caroline will not marry Elias Ford. She will hang, or she will rot in a military prison for 20 years. Carrie stood by the stairs. She felt cold, exposed. She had been careless. "What do you want?" Thomas asked, his voice broken. "I want the deed," Briggs said. Turning around, "Sign the land over to the Railroad Trust. Today. Retain residence rights for your lifetime. But the ownership transfers now. Do that, and the button disappears. The rumors stop. Caroline remains a confused young woman who needs a husband." Thomas looked at his daughter. He looked at the ranch he had built with his bare hands. He picked up the pen. "Don't, Father," Carrie whispered. Thomas looked at her, tears in his eyes. "I cannot let them hang you, Carrie." He signed the paper. Briggs took the deed, folding it neatly into his pocket. He tipped his hat to Carrie. "A wise choice. The wedding to Mr. Ford will take place on Saturday. I will be sure to attend." As Briggs rode away, Carrie felt a strange calm settle over her. The worst had happened. Her father was broken. Her future was sold. She had nothing left to lose. That night, she met Eshko one last time at the river. "He has won," Carrie said, her voice hollow. "He has the land. He is my father." "He does not have us," Eshko said. "He still thinks we will ride into his trap at Raven Pass." "But you won't," Carrie said. "You know—" "We will not ride into the trap," Eshko said, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "We will spring it." "What do you mean?" "Briggs expects a massacre," Eshko said. "He expects to kill us in the dark where no one sees. But what if the world is watching?" Carrie's mind raced. "The witnesses." "You said we needed witnesses." If Briggs attacks while civilians are there, Eshko started.
Then it's murder,
Carrie finished. Not war, murder. She grabbed Eshko's arm.
I can do it. I can get them there.
Elias Ford, the preacher, the blacksmith. They all gossip. If I tell them I am going to Raven Pass to meet my lover, they will follow, Eshko said. To catch you in sin.
Yes,
Carrie said, a bitter smile touching her lips. They will come to shame me, but they will see a monster instead. It is dangerous, Eshko warned. You will be in the crossfire.
I am already in the crossfire,
Carrie said. She touched the beaded bracelet on her wrist. Friday morning, 800 hours. I will be there. And I will be waiting, Eshko promised. He squeezed her hand, then turned and melted into the river mist. Carrie rode back to the ranch. She had lost her house. She had lost her reputation. But as she looked at the signed deed lying on her father's desk, she knew that on Friday, she would either win back her soul, or she would die trying. The inciting incident was over. The rising action was complete. Now, the climax awaited at Raven Pass. Friday morning dawned with a sky the color of bruised iron. The wind that swept through the town of Dry Creek carried the scent of coming rain. But beneath that, there was a sharper, more metallic smell, the scent of anticipation. Caroline Hart stood before the mirror in her bedroom. She wore her riding habit, dark blue wool that buttoned to the throat. It was a severe, practical garment, not the dress of a woman preparing for a wedding rehearsal, but the armor of a woman preparing for war. Downstairs, Elias Ford was waiting. He had arrived early, his carriage gleaming, expecting to escort his betrothed to the church to discuss floral arrangements. Carrie descended the stairs. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry and focused.
Mr. Ford,
she said, her voice devoid of inflection. I am afraid the flowers must wait. Elias frowned, checking his pocket watch. Now, Caroline, Major Briggs has been quite insistent that we settle these matters before the military operation begins at noon. He wants the valley to be peaceful.
The valley will not be peaceful.
Elias, Carrie said. She walked past him to the door, where two other men were waiting on the porch. One was Reverend Miller, a tall, gaunt man with a Bible clutched in his hand like a weapon. The other was Mr. Henderson, the blacksmith, whose forearms were as thick as tree trunks. Miss Hart, the Reverend said, looking uneasy. You sent a message. You said God's law was being broken.
I said I would show you the truth,
Carrie corrected. I am riding to Raven Pass. Major Briggs is marching there now. He told the town he goes to clear a bandit hideout. I tell you, he is going to commit murder. Elias Ford sputtered, stepping onto the porch. Caroline, this is madness. The Major is a decorated officer.
If he is a hero,
Carrie said, turning to face them, then he has nothing to fear from witnesses. But if I am right, and he plans to slaughter men who have come to talk peace, then your silence makes you accomplices. She looked at Henderson. You have children. Mr. Henderson, would you want them to inherit land bought with innocent blood? The blacksmith shifted his weight.
I heard rumors, Miss Hart, about those riders who attacked you. My boy saw the horses come back, said they were shod with army iron.
Then come with me, Carrie said. See for yourselves. She did not wait for their answer. She mounted Buster, the roan gelding, and turned him toward the north, behind her. She heard the heavy sigh of the blacksmith and the creak of leather as he mounted his own horse. The Reverend followed. Even Elias Ford, driven by a mix of curiosity and indignation, climbed into his carriage and whipped the horses into a trot. The procession moved out of Dry Creek, a strange parade of the faithful and the doubtful, heading toward the throat of the mountains. Raven Pass was a jagged scar in the earth. Steep walls of red granite rose on either side, creating a narrow corridor that twisted like a dying snake. It was a natural ambush point, a place where shadows lingered even when the sun was high. Major Colton Briggs sat on his horse near the southern entrance of the pass. Behind him stood 30 cavalrymen, their carbines resting on their thighs. Further back,
A wagon covered with a canvas tarp waited. Briggs checked his watch. 800 hours. "Where are they?" he muttered. "Scouts report movement on the ridge." "Major," a lieutenant whispered. "But they aren't coming down into the floor of the pass." Briggs scowled. The plan relied on the Comanche warriors riding through the narrow choke point. He had ordered his men to plant charges of black powder and dynamite beneath the loose scree on the western wall. One signal, one explosion, and the cliff would collapse, burying the savages under 1,000 tons of rock. It was clean. It was efficient. And it could be blamed on a structural collapse during the fighting. "Bait them," Briggs ordered. "Send a rider forward. Fire a few rounds into the rocks." "Sir?" The lieutenant hesitated. "If we fire first." "Do it," Briggs snapped. A soldier spurred his horse forward, raising his pistol. He fired 3 shots into the air. The cracks echoed off the canyon walls, sharp and lonely. Silence followed. Then, from the high ridge to the east, a single sound drifted down. It was laughter. Briggs' face turned a mottled red. He looked up, standing on the very edge of the precipice. Silhouetted against the gray sky was a line of mounted warriors. They were not hiding. They were watching. And in the center sat Eshko on his paint stallion. He held no weapon. He simply sat, looking down at the soldiers trapped in the narrow bottom of the canyon. "He mocks us," Briggs hissed. "He knows." "Major," a sentry shouted from the rear. "Riders approaching civilians." Briggs spun his horse around. His heart slammed against his ribs. This was not part of the script. Caroline Hart rode into the pass, flanked by the blacksmith and the preacher. Elias Ford's carriage rattled behind them, looking absurdly out of place in the rugged terrain. "What is the meaning of this?" Briggs roared, riding to meet them. "Miss Hart, I gave strict orders. This is a combat zone." "It looks very quiet for a combat zone." "Major," Carrie said, her voice carrying clear and cold in the echoing canyon. She stopped her horse 10 yards from him. "Turn around," Briggs commanded, his hand drifting to his holster. "We have engaged the enemy. It is not safe." Engaged. Carrie pointed to the ridge where Eshko and his men sat motionless. "They seem to be waiting, just as I told you they would." Reverend Miller rode forward, clutching his Bible. "Major, Miss Hart claims you have rigged this pass with explosives. She claims you intend to kill these men during a parley. She is hysterical," Briggs spat. "There are no explosives. We are here to flush out raiders." "Then what is in the wagon?" "Major?" Carrie asked. She pointed to the covered wagon at the rear of the column. "Supplies food, or is it the mining powder you requisitioned from the quarry last Tuesday?" The soldiers glanced at each other. They knew what was in the wagon. They knew what was buried under the rocks. "This is treason," Briggs said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Lieutenant, arrest Miss Hart. Escort these civilians back to town. If they resist, shoot the horses. No one is arresting anyone." Henderson, the blacksmith, shouted. He pulled a heavy hammer from his saddlebag, a tool of his trade, but a formidable weapon in his large hand. "We want to see the wagon, Briggs." "You forget yourself, blacksmith," Briggs yelled. "I am the law here." "You are a liar," Carrie shouted, standing in her stirrups. "You hired men to paint their faces. You attacked me on the road to steal the bank draft, so my father would be desperate enough to sell. I have the map. Colton. I found it in your office. Unit B to secure the ridge. Explosives at 0800. She reached into her coat and pulled out the stolen map, waving it in the air. "He is selling this land to the railroad," Carrie screamed to the soldiers. "He is not protecting you. He is using you as executioners so he can get rich." The soldiers began to murmur, rifles lowered. Doubt, once planted, grew rapidly in the fertile soil of fear. "She lies," Briggs screamed, losing his composure. "Kill them! Kill the Indians! Fire!" No one fired. From the ridge above, Eshko raised his bow. He did not aim at Briggs. He aimed at the pile of loose rocks near the wagon, the spot where the fuse line ran. He released the string. The arrow flew in a high arc, singing through the air.
It struck the wooden crate peeking out from under the canvas of the supply wagon the wagon Briggs had claimed held food. The arrow tip, hardened steel, punched through the wood. It did not explode, but it split the side of the crate. A stream of fine, black powder poured out, trickling onto the ground like dark sand. "Powder!" a soldier yelled, backing his horse away. "It's blasting powder!" The lie was broken. "It's a trap!" another soldier shouted. "We're standing on a powder keg!" Briggs looked around, wild-eyed. He saw the judgment in the Reverend's eyes, the anger in the blacksmith's face, and the mutiny in his own men's posture. He looked up at the ridge and saw Eshko, the savage he had dismissed, looking down like a judge. "I will not lose," Briggs snarled. He drew his revolver and aimed it not at the warriors, but at Carrie. "You ruin everything," he whispered. "No!" The shout came from two directions, from the blacksmith, who charged his horse forward, and from the ridge. Eshko drove his heels into the stallion's flanks. The horse launched itself down the steep scree slope. It was a suicidal descent, a slide of hooves and sliding rock. Briggs fired. The bullet missed Carrie by inches, tearing through the fabric of her sleeve. Nutmeg reared. Carrie fought to stay mounted. "Open fire!" Briggs screamed at his men. "That is a direct order. Kill them all!" Confusion reigned. Some loyal soldiers raised their rifles and fired toward the descending Comanche. Bullets pinged off the rocks. Eshko's warriors on the ridge returned fire, a hail of arrows and rifle shots raining down, forcing the soldiers to take cover. But Eshko did not stop. He hit the canyon floor at a run, abandoning his horse as it stumbled. He rolled, coming up with his knife in hand, sprinting toward Briggs. "Shoot him!" Briggs yelled, swinging his gun toward the charging warrior. A young private raised his carbine, aiming directly at Eshko's chest. Carrie saw it. She did not think. She did not calculate. She kicked Buster and drove the horse directly between the soldier and Eshko. "Stop!" she screamed, throwing her arms out. "Shooting him is shooting the truth!" The private flinched. Jerking his barrel up, the shot went wild. Eshko reached Briggs. The major tried to fire again, but Eshko slammed into him, tackling him off his horse. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust. Briggs was stronger, heavier, fueled by panic. He struck Eshko in the face with the butt of his pistol, splitting the young man's lip. Eshko grunted but did not let go. He grappled for the gun. "I will kill you," Briggs screamed, his face a mask of blood and dust. "I will bury you all." He kicked Eshko off and scrambled toward the wagon. He had a lucifer match in his hand. He struck it against his boot. The flame flared. "Get back!" Briggs shrieked. "I'll blow the pass. I'll bring the mountain down." He threw the match at the trail of spilled powder. "Run!" Eshko shouted to Carrie. The powder caught. The flame raced toward the wagon. But the arrow Eshko had shot earlier, the one stuck in the crate, had done more than spill powder. It had jammed the lid. The pressure inside the crate was not sealed tight enough for a massive detonation, but enough for a violent rupture. The wagon exploded. It was not the earth-shattering boom Briggs had planned for the cliff, but it was a concussive blast that shook the canyon floor. The shockwave threw horses and men to the ground. The blast slammed into the canyon wall, destabilizing the loose rock where the main charges were buried. They didn't detonate, but the rock face, weakened by the vibrations, gave way. A landslide began. Briggs, standing closest to the wagon, looked up. A slab of granite the size of a church door detached itself from the cliff. He didn't even have time to scream. The rocks crashed down, burying the wagon and the major in a cloud of choking red dust. The rumbling continued for a terrifying 10 seconds. Then silence fell. When the dust cleared, a pile of rubble stood where Major Colton Briggs had been, but the force of the blast had cracked the ledge where Carrie and Eshko stood. The ground beneath them tilted. "Carrie!" Eshko lunged for her as her horse bolted. The ground gave way. Carrie was thrown back, landing on safe ground, but Eshko slipped. The edge of the ravine crumbled. He went over the side. "Eshko!" Carrie screamed. She scrambled on her hands and knees to the edge. It was a sheer drop of 50 feet to a dry riverbed below. Eshko was hanging by one hand, his fingers gripping a protruding root of a mesquite bush that grew from the cliff face. His other arm hung uselessly at his side, blood soaking the buckskin sleeve where a bullet or rock had grazed him. The root snapped. He slipped 6 inches. "Grab my hand," Carrie yelled, reaching down. She lay flat on her stomach, extending her arm as far as she could. Their fingers brushed. "It is too far," Eshko gritted out, pain etching his face. "Let go! Caroline, you will fall!" "No." Carrie dug her boots into the loose dirt. "I have never done this before. Eshko, I have never let go of something I love, and I am not starting now." She lunged further, risking her own balance. Her hand clamped around his wrist. His hand gripped hers. The weight was immense. It felt as if her arm would be torn from its socket. She groaned, her face pressed into the dirt. "Pull!" Reverend Miller's voice boomed. Suddenly, Carrie felt strong hands grabbing her ankles. The blacksmith, "We got you, Miss Hart!" Henderson yelled. "Heave!" With the added strength, Carrie pulled. She dragged Eshko up, inch by agonizing inch, until his chest cleared the lip of the cliff. He scrabbled with his good arm, finding purchase, and rolled onto solid ground. He lay there, gasping for air, his chest heaving. Carrie collapsed beside him, her hand still gripping his wrist so tight her knuckles were white. They lay in the dirt, the white woman and the Comanche warrior, linked together while the dust of the explosion swirled around them. The soldiers stood in a circle, their guns lowered. They looked at the pile of rocks that was their commander. They looked at the wagon that had been a bomb. And they looked at the 2 people on the ground. Reverend Miller stepped forward. He picked up his Bible, which had fallen in the mud, and dusted it off. "Major Briggs is dead," the Reverend announced, his voice shaking but loud. "By his own hand and his own wickedness." He looked at the lieutenant, who was now the ranking officer. "Lieutenant," the Reverend said, "you have seen the truth. You saw who fired first. You saw who saved whom." The lieutenant looked at Eshko, then at Carrie. He holstered his pistol. "I saw," the lieutenant said quietly. He turned to his men. "Secure the weapons, but no one fires. We are standing down, high on the ridge." The Comanche warriors lowered their bows. They did not cheer. They simply watched, silent witnesses to the breaking of the cycle. Carrie sat up. She wiped the dirt from her face and looked at Eshko. He was bleeding, bruised, and exhausted, but he was alive. He looked at her, and a slow, painful smile touched his lips. "You held on," he whispered. "I told you," Carrie said, her voice trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline. "I am learning." She helped him stand. Together, they faced the soldiers and the townspeople. There was no need for speeches. The pile of rocks spoke for Briggs. The open sky spoke for the land, and the clasped hands of Caroline Hart and Eshko spoke for the future. The climax had ended not with a massacre, but with a revelation. The dust was settling, but the world had changed. The wolf and the sheep had stood together against the butcher, and they had won. But as Carrie looked at the uncertain faces of the soldiers, she knew that surviving the explosion was only the first step. Living with the echoes would be the true test. The dust from the explosion at Raven Pass did not settle for 3 days. It hung in the air like a shroud, painting the sunset a bloody, violent red that stretched from the Wichita Mountains all the way to the Red River. But the silence that followed the explosion was even heavier than the dust. It was a fragile, terrified silence. The kind that exists in a room where a gun has just gone off and everyone is checking their own bodies to see if they are the one bleeding. They had moved the wounded to a grove of cottonwood trees near the riverbank, a mile south of the pass. It was neutral ground, neither fully Army territory nor Comanche land, a temporary sanctuary carved out of necessity. Caroline Hart knelt in the dirt, her expensive blue riding habit stained with mud and dried blood. She dipped a rag into a tin basin of cool river water and wrung it out. Her hands, usually so steady on the reins of a horse, were trembling. Eshko lay on a buffalo robe spread over the grass. His chest rose and fell in shallow, hitching breaths. The fall from the cliff had broken 2 of his ribs, and the graze from the bullet on his arm was angry and swollen. But it was the fever that worried Carrie the most. It radiated off him like heat from a stove, slicking his bronze skin with sweat. "He is burning up," Carrie whispered. Dr. Reynolds, the regimental surgeon from the fort, wiped his spectacles on his apron. He was a gruff man with whiskey on his breath, but his hands were gentle. He had been ordered to treat the hostiles by the lieutenant who had taken command after Briggs's death. "The body is fighting the shock. Miss Hart," Dr. Reynolds said. "And the infection, I cleaned the wound with carbolic acid. The rest is up to him. And God, I suppose." He looked at Carrie, his expression softening. "You should rest, child. You have been here for 24 hours straight. Your father is pacing a hole in the ground outside the perimeter." "I will not leave him," Carrie said. Her voice was quiet, but it had the tensile strength of barbed wire. "If I leave, someone might decide he is better off dead." Dr. Reynolds sighed, packing his bag. "The soldiers are watching the perimeter. Miss Hart, there will be no more killing today. Colonel Sterling has arrived from Fort Sill. He is a hard man, but he is a stickler for the rules. He won't tolerate a lynching." He tipped his hat and walked away toward the tents where the wounded soldiers lay. Carrie turned back to Eshko. She placed the cool rag on his forehead. He stirred, his eyelids fluttering. He mumbled something in his own tongue, a low, guttural sound of distress. "Shh," Carrie soothed, brushing a damp lock of black hair away from his face. "I am here. You are safe." Eshko's eyes opened. They were glassy and unfocused for a moment before they found her face. He tried to smile, but it was more of a grimace. "The mountain," he rasped. "Did it fall?" "Briggs made it fall," Carrie said softly. "But it fell on him. The pass is blocked. Your people are safe." Eshko let out a breath that seemed to deflate his entire frame. He reached out with his good hand. Carrie took it immediately, interlacing her fingers with his. His palm was calloused and hot. Hers was soft but dirty. It was a scandalous point of contact, a white woman holding hands with a Comanche warrior in plain sight of the U.S. Army, but Carrie did not care. She held on as if he were the only anchor in a spinning world. Outside the grove, the world was trying to reassemble itself. Colonel Sterling had indeed arrived, riding in with 2 squadrons of fresh cavalry. He had set up a command tent and was currently conducting an inquiry that felt more like a court-martial. Reverend Miller sat on a camp stool in front of the colonel's desk. The reverend still clutched his Bible. "I tell you, Colonel," the reverend said, his voice booming. "It was a trap, plain and simple. Major Briggs had that wagon rigged. I saw the powder spill with my own eyes. And that boy, the one lying by the river, he didn't shoot. He saved the major's soul from the sin of murder, though the major didn't appreciate the favor." "And the map?" Colonel Sterling asked. He was a gray-haired man with a face carved from granite, devoid of the slimy ambition that had marked Briggs. "Miss Hart has the map," the reverend said. "It clearly marks the explosives. It was not a battle. Colonel, it was an extermination planned for profit." The blacksmith, Mr. Henderson, stood nearby, his arms crossed. "And if you try to hang that girl or that boy," Henderson rumbled, "you'll have to hang half the town of Dry Creek with them. We saw what we saw. Briggs was the villain here." Colonel Sterling rubbed his temples. The situation was a nightmare. A commanding officer dead, a railroad conspiracy exposed, and a local populace siding with the Comanche against the army. "There will be a ceasefire," Colonel Sterling announced, his voice carrying to the soldiers standing guard. "We will maintain our positions. I will send a dispatch to Washington. Until then, the Comanche are to be treated as non-combatants under temporary protection. Anyone firing a weapon without my direct order will be shot. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," the lieutenant replied. The order brought a fragile peace, but it did not stop the whispers. As Carrie walked to the river to refill the basin, she felt the eyes of the townspeople who had come out to gawk. "Look at her," a woman in a bonnet hissed to her neighbor. "Blood on her dress, holding hands with a savage. She has no shame."
She saved your husband's life." "Martha," the blacksmith's wife snapped back, "if that wagon had blown like Briggs wanted, half the pass would have come down on our men too. She is a hero." "She is a traitor to her race," a man muttered, spitting tobacco juice near Carrie's boots. Carrie stopped. She looked at the man. He was a ranch hand from the Double Bar spread, a man who had once tipped his hat to her at the general store. "I am a traitor to nothing but hate," Carrie said calmly. "If you have a problem with me, sir, you can take it up with the colonel. Or you can go home and thank God you are not buried under 1,000 tons of rock." She walked past him, her head high. The insults stung, but they felt distant, like the buzzing of flies. She had seen death close up. She had felt the weight of a man's life in her hand as he dangled over a precipice. The opinion of a small-minded man in a dirty shirt no longer held any power over her. But the opinion of one man still mattered. Thomas Hart was waiting for her when she returned to the grove. He stood by the tree where Eshko lay, looking down at the sleeping warrior with a complex expression of anger, fear, and reluctant awe. "Father," Carrie said, setting the basin down. Thomas turned. He looked old. The events of the last week had carved new lines into his face. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and seemed to struggle to recognize the girl he had raised. "You defied me," Thomas said. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, trembling rumble. "You stole from a military fort. You rode into a crossfire. You humiliated me before Elias Ford. I saved you," Carrie corrected him. "I saved you from signing a deed that was blood money. I saved you from being the man who sold his neighbors for a railway line. And what is the cost?" Thomas gestured to the camp. "Your name is mud in this town. Caroline, Elias Ford has withdrawn his offer. No decent man will look at you now. You have thrown away your future." "I have thrown away your version of my future," Carrie said. She stepped closer to him. "I will not marry Elias Ford. I will not marry a man I do not love just to secure your fences. If that makes me a pariah, then I will be a pariah. But I will be a pariah who can sleep at night." Thomas stared at her. He opened his mouth to argue, to invoke his authority as a father, but the words died in his throat. He saw the set of her jaw. It was his jaw. He saw the fire in her eyes. It was the same fire that had driven him west 30 years ago, before the debt and the drought had beaten him down. He looked at Eshko, then back at Carrie. "He is a Comanche," Thomas whispered. "The world will not let you be. They will tear you apart." "Then let them try," Carrie said. "I have learned to ride without a saddle. Father, I can handle a few bumps." Thomas was silent for a long time. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his thinning hair. The anger slowly drained out of him, leaving only a weary sadness. "I forgot," he murmured. "I forgot that I raised a wild Mustang, not a carriage horse." He reached out and awkwardly patted her shoulder. It was not a hug, but it was a truce. "I will speak to the colonel," Thomas said gruffly. "I will tell him. I will tell him my daughter acted to prevent a crime. I will not let them put you in a cell." "Thank you, Papa," Carrie whispered. Thomas looked at Eshko one last time. "He is strong," he admitted grudgingly. "To climb that cliff with a bullet in him. He is strong." He put his hat back on and walked away toward the command tent, walking with a straighter spine than he had in years. He was still a man with debts, but he was no longer a man who had sold his soul. As evening fell, the fever broke. Eshko's skin cooled, and his breathing deepened. Gray Owl, the elder chief, came to the grove. He was accompanied by 2 other warriors, but they left their weapons at the perimeter as a sign of respect for the ceasefire. Gray Owl sat beside Eshko. He chanted a low song, wafting smoke from a bundle of burning sage over the young man's body. Carrie sat on the other side, silent. When the chant ended, Gray Owl turned his ancient eyes to Carrie. "The wolf lives," Gray Owl said. "His spirit wandered the ghost path, but you called him back." "He is stubborn," Carrie said, a small smile touching her lips. "The blue coats talk," Gray Owl said. "They say there will be a council. They say we must move to the land by the Fort Sill Agency. They say we cannot stay here in the valley. Carrie felt a pang of sorrow. I am sorry. We stopped the slaughter, but we could not stop the railroad. The iron horse eats the earth, Grey Owl agreed. It cannot be stopped, only slowed. But because of what happened at the pass, we do not go as prisoners. We go as men who chose peace. We go with our horses and our guns and our heads up. That is the difference. He looked at Carrie with a deep solemnity. You stood between the bullet and the blood. You are a bridge. Caroline Hart. A bridge is a hard thing to be. People walk on you from both sides. I know, Carrie said. Eshko shifted and opened his eyes. He was weak, but his mind was clear. He looked at his uncle, then at Carrie. The bridge stands, Eshko whispered. Grey Owl reached into his pouch. He pulled out the leather charm Carrie had returned to Eshko before the battle, the one with the turtle bead. He also pulled out a second leather thong, this one bearing a small, polished piece of turquoise. He took the turtle charm and tied it around Eshko's wrist. Then he took the turquoise charm and turned to Carrie. Give me your hand, the old chief commanded. Carrie extended her hand. Grey Owl tied the leather strip around her wrist. The turquoise felt cool against her skin. The turtle for him, for the hard shell that endures. Grey Owl said, The stone of the sky for you, for the eyes that see clear. These are tied with the same knot. Where one goes, the spirit of the other follows. It was not a wedding ceremony. Such a thing would be impossible in the eyes of the church or the state. But in the twilight by the river, it felt more binding than any paper Briggs had ever drafted. We live in two suns, Grey Owl said. We go north to the agency. It is a long ride. He stood up, leaving the two of them alone. Carrie looked at Eshko. The reality of their situation settled over them like the evening mist. You have to go, Carrie said, her voice catching. If you stay here... If I stay, I am a target, Eshko finished. And if you come with me, you live in a tent, hungry, watched by soldiers, hated by my people who will blame you for their displacement. And if I stay here, Carrie said, I am the spinster in the blue dress who talks to ghosts. No, Eshko said. He struggled to sit up, ignoring Carrie's protests. He leaned against the tree trunk, his face close to hers. You are not a ghost. You are the fire. He reached out and touched the turquoise on her wrist. We must walk separate paths for a time. Caroline, my family needs me. Your father needs you. But the path is a circle. Will I see you again? Carrie asked, tears finally spilling over. The railroad brings many things, Eshko said. It brings change, but it also brings travel. I will not be a warrior forever. The buffalo are gone. I must learn a new way to be Comanche. Perhaps a guide. A guide, Carrie repeated, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. And you, Eshko said, looking at the determination in her face. You will not marry the old man with the dry heart. What will you do? Carrie looked toward the road that led to Dry Creek. She thought of the empty plains, the travelers passing through, the changing world. My father has land near the crossroads, she said, the idea forming even as she spoke. He owes the bank, but the land is ours. It is a good place for a way station, a place where people stop, where horses are changed, a place for travelers. Eshko nodded. A neutral ground. Yes, Carrie said. A place where no one cares what color your skin is, as long as your money is good and your heart is true. She squeezed his hand. I will build it. Eshko, I will build a place where you can walk through the front door. Then I will come, Eshko promised. When the snow melts. When I have settled my mother and brother in the new lands, I will come to this way station. They sat together as the stars came out. Two outcasts under the vast American sky. The pain of the impending separation was sharp, a physical ache in Carrie's chest. But beneath the pain was a profound sense of purpose. They had not just survived a battle, they had survived the crushing weight of their society's expectations. They were battered, they were bleeding, and they were about to be separated by 100 miles of prairie. But as Carrie looked at the turquoise stone on her wrist and the matching leather on his, she knew that the distance was only geography. The falling action had done its work. The adrenaline of the climax had faded, leaving behind the hard, cold truth of the consequences. There was no magical happy ending where the tribe got their land back and the town accepted them. There was compromise. There was a loss. There was the bitter taste of reality. But there was also love. Not the fairy tale love of storybooks, but a rugged, weathered love that could survive a drought. "Rest now," Carrie whispered, pressing a kiss to his fever-warm forehead. "You have a long ride ahead." "And you have a station to build," Eshko murmured, his eyes closing as sleep claimed him. Carrie sat watch through the night, listening to the river flow. It moved relentlessly toward the sea, carving through rock and earth, never stopping, never turning back. She felt a kinship with that water. She would move forward too. She would endure. And she would be ready when the wolf returned to her door. The whistle of the train was a sound that split the sky in two. It was a high, lonesome shriek that echoed off the granite walls of the Wichita Mountains, announcing to the coyotes and the cactus that the modern world had arrived with a belly full of coal and a heart of iron. It had been 1 year since the explosion at Raven Pass. 1 year since the dust had settled and the blood had dried. The seasons had turned, turning the prairie from the lush green of spring to the burnt gold of summer, and finally to the stark, biting gray of winter before blooming once again. Dry Creek was no longer a dusty outpost. It was a boom town. The railroad had laid its tracks, 2 ribbons of steel slicing through the valley. With the tracks came timber, glass, whiskey, and men. Thousands of men. They spilled out of the cattle cars and the passenger coaches, hungry for land and eager to build a fortune in the New West. But the Hart Ranch was still standing. It had lost 300 acres to the right-of-way, a sale forced by eminent domain, but paid for at a fair price thanks to the intervention of Colonel Sterling. Thomas Hart had used the money to pay off the bank. The debt that had choked him for a decade was gone, replaced by a smaller, more manageable herd of cattle and a newfound, quiet dignity. Caroline Hart, however, was not at the ranch. She stood behind the counter of a long, low building situated 5 miles west of the town, right at the crossroads where the new wagon road met the trail leading north to the reservation lands. The sign swinging above the porch read simply, "Hart's Crossing." It was not a saloon, and it was not a hotel. It was something in between. On one side of the room, bolts of calico and sturdy wool sat on shelves, alongside jars of pickles and sacks of flour. On the other side, 3 round tables were set with coffee pots and plates of fresh cornbread. Outside, a corral held fresh horses for the stagecoaches and the mail riders. "More coffee, Mr. O'Malley?" Carrie asked, holding the tin pot. "Please, Miss Carrie," the man replied. He was a surveyor for the railroad, a man with sun-bleached hair and skin like leather. "And another piece of that bread, if you don't mind. Tastes like my mother's." Carrie smiled. She wore a simple dress of gray cotton, practical for working, but around her neck, on a leather thong, hung a piece of polished turquoise. It rested against her skin, a constant weight, a constant reminder. The door opened, letting in a gust of prairie wind and the bright, harsh sunlight. Conversation in the room faltered. The surveyor lowered his cup. 2 cowboys at the corner table shifted in their chairs, their hands drifting toward their belts. Eshko stood in the doorway. He looked different than he had a year ago. He still wore his buckskin leggings and moccasins, but he now wore a white man's button-down shirt beneath a heavy wool vest. His hair was still long, braided with intention, but he carried a repeating Winchester rifle in a leather scabbard slung over his shoulder, a tool of his new trade. He was not a warrior at war. He was a liaison. The treaty following the Raven Pass incident had been bitter, but it had contained clauses that Grey Owl had insisted upon. The Comanche would move to the agency lands. Yes, but they retained the right to police the boundaries of their sacred sites. The railroad needed guides to ensure their workers didn't wander into places that would start another war. Eshko was that guide. He walked to the counter, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. He did not look at the cowboys.
He looked only at Carrie. "The noon train is on time," Eshko said. His English had improved, smoothed by months of negotiation and trade. "I brought the mail from the agency." He placed a leather satchel on the counter. "Thank you. Eshko," Carrie said. Her voice was calm, professional, but her eyes betrayed her. They softened, drinking in the sight of him like a traveler finding water in the desert. "Coffee. Black," he said. "With sugar." She poured the cup. Their fingers brushed as she slid it across the wood. It was a fleeting touch, lasting no more than a second. But it sent a spark through the room that everyone felt. "I didn't know we were serving blankets in here," a voice drawled from the corner. It was one of the new hands from the double bar, a man named Skinner who had arrived from the east only a month ago. He didn't know the history of the valley. He only knew prejudice. The room went deadly silent. Carrie set the coffee pot down with a sharp clack. "We serve customers, Mr. Skinner," Carrie said, her voice turning to ice. "If you have a problem with the clientele, the door is behind you," Skinner laughed, standing up. He was a big man, fueled by whiskey and arrogance. "I just don't think a decent white woman should be pouring coffee for a savage who probably scalped her neighbors." Eshko did not move. He sipped his coffee, his back to the man. It was the ultimate insult, indifference. "Turn around, boy," Skinner growled, his hand resting on his revolver. "I'm talking to you. Sit down, you fool." The surveyor, O'Malley, hissed. "You don't know who that is." "I know it's an Indian," Skinner spat, "and I don't like the smell." Before Carrie could reach for the shotgun she kept under the counter, a shadow detached itself from the back of the room. Thomas Hart had been sitting in the rocking chair by the stove, mending a bridle. He stood up now. He was 60 years of age, his hair entirely white, but he moved with the slow, terrifying deliberation of an old bull. He walked over to Skinner's table. "Mr. Skinner," Thomas said. His voice was not loud, but it commanded the room instantly. Skinner looked at the older man. "Mr. Hart, I'm just defending your daughter's honor." "My daughter's honor is not for you to defend," Thomas said. "It is for her to define." Thomas looked at Eshko, then back at Skinner. "That man," Thomas pointed a calloused finger at the Comanche, "pulled my daughter off a cliff while the ground was crumbling under his feet. He took a bullet intended for a soldier. He is the reason the railroad didn't blow this valley to Kingdom Come." Thomas leaned in, his face inches from Skinner's. "This is her roof. This is her home, and anyone she welcomes here is a guest of the Hart family. If you do not like it, you can ride to the next station. It is 20 miles that way. I suggest you start walking." Skinner looked around the room. He saw the surveyor nodding in agreement. He saw the other cowboys looking at their boots. He saw the steel in Thomas Hart's eyes. He spat on the floor, grabbed his hat, and walked out. The door slammed shut. The tension broke. Thomas turned to Eshko. He did not smile. Thomas Hart was not a man given to easy smiles, but he nodded, a short, sharp dip of his chin. "Eshko," Thomas said. "Thomas," Eshko replied, returning the nod. It was not friendship, perhaps not yet, but it was respect. It was a peace treaty signed not in ink, but in the recognition of shared stubbornness. Thomas picked up his bridle and went back to his chair. Carrie let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She looked at Eshko, and he winked a small, quick gesture that made her heart tumble. The day wore on. The customers came and went. The sun began its long descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and apricot. By 8 o'clock in the evening, the station was empty. Thomas had driven back to the ranch house for supper. Carrie locked the front door and turned down the kerosene lamps until the room was bathed in a soft, golden glow. She walked out onto the back porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and cooling earth. The moon was a sliver of silver high in the dark expanse. Eshko was waiting there. He was leaning against the railing, looking out at the silhouette of the hills. "Your father has found his voice," Eshko said softly without turning around. "He found it a year ago," Carrie said.
moving to stand beside him. He just needed a reason to use it. He defended me, Eshko mused. That is strange. He defended his home, Carrie corrected. And you are part of it now, whether he admits it out loud or not. Eshko turned to her. In the moonlight, the sharp angles of his face were softened. He looked tired. The work of walking between two worlds was exhausting. He spent his days translating the demands of engineers to his elders, trying to preserve dignity in the face of progress. He swallowed his pride daily to ensure his people had food and peace. Are you staying? Carrie asked. Or do you ride back to the agency tonight? The ride is long, Eshko said, and my horse is tired. And the rider is lonely, he admitted. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, mapped with the scars of labor and war. Carrie's hand, now roughened by the work of the station, fitted into his perfectly. We are building a strange thing, Caroline, Eshko said. A trading post where the trade is not furs, but understanding it is fragile. Everything important is fragile, Carrie said. She looked out at the vast, empty land. Do you remember what I said that first night on the prairie, when I was scared of the horse? Eshko smiled, the memory lighting up his eyes. You said you had never done this before. I feel it again, Carrie whispered. Every day, the town whispers. The women look at me like I am curious. I am 30 miles from the ranch house, living alone, running a business, loving a man the law says I shouldn't. She squeezed his hand, looking up at him with a vulnerability she showed to no one else. I have never done this before, she confessed. Building a life that doesn't fit anyone's rules. There is no map for this. Eshko, I don't know if I am doing it right. Eshko moved closer. He wrapped his other hand around hers, encasing it in warmth. He looked at the station behind them, the sturdy logs, the warm light in the window, the place where a white father had defended a Comanche warrior. You are doing it, he said. You are carving a path where there was only rock. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. You are afraid, he asked. Terrified, she breathed. Good, Eshko said. Fear keeps the senses sharp. He pulled back slightly, a mischievous glint returning to his eyes. He gestured to the corral where the paint stallion, the same horse they had ridden that night at the river, was waiting. Come, he said. Where? To the ridge. The train comes at 9. The night express. Carrie hesitated only for a heartbeat. Then she smiled. I need my shawl. You do not need a shawl, Eshko said. You have me. They walked to the corral. Eshko swung up onto the stallion's back with that fluid grace that never failed to steal her breath. He reached down. Ready, ready, Carrie said. She took his arm and swung up behind him. It was familiar now. Her body knew the rhythm. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against the rough wool of his vest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart. They rode out of the station yard, up the gentle slope of the hill that overlooked the valley. The night was vast. The stars were spread out like spilled diamonds on black velvet. Below them, the two steel rails glinted in the moonlight, running straight and true toward the horizon. Then they heard it, the low rumble, the rhythmic chugging of the engine. Chuff, chuff, chuff. The light of the locomotive appeared around the bend, a single, blinding eye cutting through the darkness. Smoke billowed back, illuminated by the sparks from the smokestack. It was a monster of noise and fire. A year ago, Briggs had tried to use this force to crush them. He had tried to use the inevitability of progress as a weapon of murder, but he had failed. The train roared past them, a streak of noise and motion. The ground shook. The paint stallion danced sideways, nervous. But Eshko held him steady with his knees, and Carrie held Eshko steady with her arms. They watched the train go. They saw the silhouettes of passengers in the windows, people reading newspapers, people sleeping, people heading west to find their own fortunes. None of them looked out. None of them saw the man and the woman on the hill. To the passengers, the darkness outside was empty, but it was not empty. It is fast, Carrie shouted over the noise of the wheels. "It is fast," Eshko agreed, his voice vibrating in his chest. "But it follows a track. It cannot go where it wants. It can only go where the iron is laid." He turned his head, looking back at her. "We have no track. Caroline, we can go anywhere." The train disappeared into the distance, its whistle fading to a mournful cry. The silence of the prairie rushed back in, reclaiming the night. Carrie looked back at the way station. The light from the window was a tiny yellow beacon in the immense darkness. It was small, insignificant against the scale of the railroad and the mountains, but it was theirs. "Home," Carrie whispered. "Home," Eshko echoed. He turned the horse. They did not go back immediately. They let the horse walk along the ridge, savoring the solitude. The theme of their lives had been written in violence, but the resolution was being written in quiet moments like this. They were the bridge. They were the anomaly. In a land that demanded you choose a side, white or red, civilized or savage, past or future, they had chosen simply to be together. Justice had not come from a judge's gavel. It had come from the refusal to be silent. It had come from a girl hiding under a desk and a warrior jumping off a cliff. And now, justice looked like a cup of coffee served with dignity. It looked like a father defending a guest. It looked like two people riding one horse under the moonlight, neither leading nor following, but moving together. "Then let me show you," Eshko had said once, promising to teach her to ride. Now, as they turned back toward the warmth of the fire, Carrie realized he was keeping that promise in a way she never expected. He was showing her how to live freely in a world that wanted to fence her in, and she, with her station at the crossroads, was showing him that there was a place for him to rest his head where the door would never be locked. The firelight from the station grew closer, casting long shadows across the grass. The future was uncertain. The railroad would bring more people, more fences, more laws. The struggle was not over. But as the horse carried them home, Carrie Hart leaned her head against the back of the Comanche warrior and closed her eyes, listening to the wind. It no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like a song. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a long journey from the dusty streets of Dry Creek to the ridge above the railroad tracks. I hope you enjoyed this tale of the American West, where love and courage are the only laws that truly matter. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from right now. Are you in a bustling city or out in the quiet country? Let's share our stories. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and to give this video like. And if you really enjoyed the ride, hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners around the campfire. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open. Good night.